There's this stat, people leave supervisors, not companies. Right? One of the other things I want to just pick out from the book was the notion of a fake you, that you're not your total self, that you're a different person in different situations. And you were just alluding to that, Ken, with the data. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
So I'll give you the definition quick, but I think people will know just by hearing it what it seems like, what it feels like, and when it happens. So fake you is the facade we project rather than being 100% honest.
Welcome back to Succession Stories. Today I've got two guests. They are co-founders and they have a wonderful, wonderful set of things to talk about with you today. But first, let me try to introduce both of them at a high level. They are dedicated to changing how the world communicates, which is not an easy thing. They foster leadership collaboration. They're empowering individuals to achieve their goals. They simplify communications to eliminate organizational gaps. And ultimately, what they're trying to do is create a transformative movement in business and leadership development. They're co-authors of a new book called No Honesty. Welcome to the stage. Welcome to Succession Stories, Ken Bogard and Grace Gavin, co-founders of No Honesty.
Thank you so much for having us. I know we are excited for this conversation.
Yeah, and when we're with Laurie, the more I'm with her, I'm like, I just feel like I'm in good hands.
You're both in good hands. We've got so much to dive into. Let's get started with the very first question. And it's a little bit of a provocative one. I'm going to just sort of say that because your title of your book, the title of your company is about honesty. And for those people who haven't read the title yet, I'm going to spell it out. K-N-O-W. But in the middle there is N-O. And there's a negativity that we're insinuating that maybe we don't know ourselves. We don't know our level of honesty. Why is that the title of your company? Why is that the title of the book?
I wanted something clever that would start a conversation. You know, I didn't want something that was like, I don't know, we could have just left it K-N-O-W without the no being highlighted. But then even when you say it, it has a different meaning. And so I just kind of stuck with it throughout the years. Actually, 9 years ago, I had something around that. And everybody would ask about it and question it and say, why do you have this? And the honest answer is because it causes a conversation, because there's more to the story, because now we're in engaging back and forth. You know, I don't just say I'm at ABC Wholesale and then end of the conversation, let's move on to something else. But instead, it's like, hey, we have a real challenge collectively. And there is a huge lack of honesty. No honesty, if you will, in many conversations and relationships. And so how important it is to know, K-N-O-W, the role honesty has in our life, in the direction of companies, in our relationships. So it's got double meaning to cause this exact conversation we're having now.
And Grace, when you met Ken, and I don't think this idea was fully formed, right? You guys kind of created this concept together and put a business together, put a book around it. What were some of your early thoughts as you got to understand this challenge that organizations were facing, and what drew you into it?
Yeah, I grew up in a family business, and so I didn't have the words growing up to label this as the issue that was going on. But then working with Ken and developing this, I was like, oh, this is exactly what we struggled with. And I know that it's not just contained in my family business now. So there's a little bit of a relief of, it's not just us, but also there's a way forward to fix this. And so that was part of it too. But I think working through it and realizing working on this is, okay, so we know there's a lack of honesty going on. But the question that we came back to over and over was, but why is that happening? What's stopping people from being honest? And what we really found, and what we'll get into in this conversation, is really the lack of openness on the other side. And that was a huge aha for me personally when we dug into and understood, okay, what is this openness? Why is there a lack of it? What's going on there? And the aha for me being, oh man, I personally struggle with this. I struggle with this in work. And so I got to work on this too if I'm going to be out there helping people to do this. So really going through that journey myself of how do I get to this point to do this well, to then be able to teach it to other people and to teach it to other teams and the importance of it.
Yeah. And for anybody watching this little video on YouTube or on our LinkedIn, you'll see the book here, No Honesty. So again, that little play on words, if you will, is really an important set of words. No, K-N-O-W, and no, which is the negative, no honesty. When I read this book, I thought it was great how so many stories were included from both of you and some anonymized client stories. I presume they're anonymized. I didn't Google them. But I think that is the next thing I want to talk about, which is the stories and the storytelling and why that is so important to help people see where some of the gaps are.
Yeah, I'll chime in. A majority of them are not hidden. I mean, these are real people, real names, real companies. So go Google them, reach out to them, and tell them thanks for sharing the story, because we're so much more clear now in scenarios that are similar, how we're behaving and what we need to do going forward. And so some of those stories you're reading, and you might use the word cringe, like, man, it's difficult. These some of them family-owned businesses like Grace has been a part of, but some of them are just real deep challenges, and all of that's just shared right there in the book. And I think my clients and Grace's clients get how important it is that it is an honest story. And so they all signed off on it and they said, we get it. And so they're a part of really helping people get this philosophy around communication too. So hallelujah to them having the courage to allow it to be that way.
Do companies tend to come to you seeking a solution? Do they know that they have a communications problem, a trust problem, an honesty problem, an openness problem? Have they self-diagnosed, or are they just saying we're dysfunctional, we don't know why?
Man, I think it's maybe half and half there. I'll get some clients that come to me and say, yes, we definitely have a communication problem. But some people are labeling it as we need to train our leaders better, or we need to have more trust, or, we've got some turnover problems going on here and we got to figure that out. And there's kind of this sense of relief when I talk to them and I say, okay, yes, I see what you're struggling with. We don't have a clear definition of what we mean by communication, how we're going to operate together as a team. And then that aha kind of goes off. They're like, oh yes, that's exactly what we're struggling with. We don't have a playbook or a handbook here, if you will.
I couldn't add to this too. Have you heard of the book Anxious Generation by chance?
No, tell me about it.
Man, is it so good. And it plays on everything we know already. We're just not saying it. So basically how damaging social media is to youth. And so as we're raising kiddos, or we were raised up, we're experiencing like how social media can be really negatively impacting our lives. And this book really paints it for us. And then all of a sudden you read this book and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it to my own kids. And it's kind of this aha, the more you get educated on it. I think it's somewhat similar with no honesty. I think we're like, oh, I know being open and honest is important. I know it's kind of tricky when I have to talk to my coworkers or my executive team, and we're not really getting fully there. I know this is kind of an issue. And then you read no honesty and you're like, okay, like I get it. We're not doing it. We're not doing it to near the depth we need to be able to move faster and communicate our problems effectively and actually put reality on the table so we can deal with it. And so I think it's similar. I think the more people get a chance to see it or read it or be presented with it, they're like, I see the problem we got, and it's time to take it to the next level.
There were a couple stories that stood out to me, and I wanted each of you to maybe share one that stands out to you. I'll tee this up, and one of you can bring it to the detail. There was the owner of I think a first or second gen business. He was, we'll call him kind of maybe a baby boomer at the time of the writing of the book, and was intending to step away, intending to start to be more arm's length, but then he wasn't. And he was still very present. He was still very present in decision making, in meetings, day-to-day operations, and it had this negative effect on the team, and it was causing some issues. Do you guys know the story I'm talking about in the book?
Yeah.
Okay, would you mind elaborate on that and tell us what ended up happening?
Yeah, so that one was a little more specific to one of the clients I was working with. Kraft is the client still to this day. And this is a pretty normal story. Laurie, I love that you're bringing it up because I know you've seen it probably 1,000 times. And so this is what happens. For most of my life, I'm an entrepreneur. I have this company. I've raised this little baby since it was me, and now it's 50 people or 100 people. And now I'm getting older. And now I realize I need to let go of the vine, but I'm not gonna, because it's my baby and I can't. And how could I? And can they possibly know better than me? I can't do it. And then control rears its dirty head. And we're like, control. And we dig our talons deeper into it. And then we're frustrated because we know I have to step out of it. So it's every person who needs to let go's issue. And so Kraft gives this very personal story of going through that. And so this man, Jeff, he was really trying to control everything. And his team is just trying to find the most honest way they can to have enough stamina to show him, like, we got this. And so instead of it being like two sides, like one side digging talons in, the other side trying to push back, it became like, how do we see this together? And how can we do this better and more effectively together? But that's going to require is, Jeff, you telling us exactly how you feel and exactly what you want. And you cannot put that armor on. And then for his son, I'm like, Brandon, you got to step up and you got to tell this man how you feel and what you want, which is a really difficult father-son relationship. And they did. And it's just so powerful because they're one of my most challenging clients I've ever had. And they're one of the most successful clients I've ever had. And so really, it's a beautiful story in there about not letting go. And now Jeff's doing it. And the man's happier. And the leadership team's empowered and they're growing. They're seeing things differently. And so it really became a beautiful handoff from Jeff to Brandon and Pat and others.
And if I'm remembering the story details, there was a pivotal question that was asked as part of your process, the 3-letter word, why? Is that right?
Yes.
And why did Jeff feel the way he was feeling? And he admitted to the room of executives something really personal. And it brought him to tears, did it not?
Right.
And then at that moment was a pivotal change of how they perceived the situation. I think the empathy level went way up, and perhaps his did too. And his guard came down, and the wall, whichever wall he had up, came down, and enabled others to come in and understand where he was at that moment and why he was doing what he was doing. I do hear it so often, especially on this show, it's succession stories, right? We talk about these transitions in business, and especially for a founder, a family-led organization, it's really hard to let go. And no matter what age or stage, depending on how you feel about it. And if we don't let others in and we're not honest about it and we're not communicating and we're not open, then they can't help us. And so I think that's probably why this story stuck with me, because it just encapsulated so many themes of what I cover with my clients and why we're trying to be proactive and how we're trying to help them. So for people listening, they could probably resonate, whether you're a family business or not. There's a lot of complications when it comes to succession. And how do we get people in a headspace to be open and honest? Tell me a little bit about your process and how it can apply to organizations in this headspace and thinking about transition, whether you are the successor or whether you're the predecessor.
Yeah, it all comes down to the two simple skills that we've been talking about that I think I'm going to define for us because it's really important and they're distinctly different. But it comes down to building those two skills. And that's, throughout our entire process, that's what we're helping people build. And so the two skills, we've said it over and over, are open and honest. Now, to be clear, them being two different things, honesty is being truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel, which I think is really important when we're talking about the transition piece of things is, what do you really want? What do you want it to look like when we're done with this? What do you want the process to feel like? How do you want it to go? How do you want it to impact people? What do you really need out of this to be successful? Like, man, I think it's a transition point of times. That's when we have to be the most 100% honest, because if we're not, we're not coming to the table together in any way that really makes sense. But on the other side of that, and where I talked about earlier, where we find that people really struggle, is the openness side of things. And so openness is listening without reservation, putting your needs and wants on pause for someone else. And so I think about the transition conversation. And if somebody across the table is saying, I want to, I don't know, sell this business, or I want to step away from this business, can the person on the other side who's going to take it over or buy it or is on the leadership team, can they just pause all of their worries, their wants, their needs, whatever comes next out of the conversation? Can they pause it for just a moment to really hear what that person is saying? Because a lot of times we don't do that. And because we don't, we miss at least half, I'll say, at least half of what they're actually saying. And then we go down the road of assumptions, which can be very, very dangerous in any kind of tough conversation. If there's going to be conflict involved, if there's a lot of moving parts and pieces. And so our entire process, that's what it really looks like, is building those two skills. And so we have the 6 practices that we walk our clients through to build those day in and day out, but it all comes back to being open and honest. And are we doing that in every single conversation that we're having throughout the entire process?
Ken, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, she nailed it pretty well. I think we'll tie it to transition, because I know that speaks to a lot of your audience as well, that, sometimes we get trapped and we answer based on everybody else's expectations. And then we wind up not getting what we want. So when somebody doesn't deliver their truly and freely themselves to the table, they deliver something else. It's like this fake human being rises up and says, well, I guess it's what you want. Well, no, you worked so hard in your business. You spent all these years in your business and you deserve getting what you want. And some people have some self-worth issues where they don't feel that way. And so they aren't clear with what they want, and they feel like it imposes on other people, and then they get screwed over. When in fact, had they just been honest to begin with, it's amazing how much the people around them actually want to help them and make this a very smooth transition, not only for themselves, but for that human being that is transitioning out of the business. So, you can apply open and honest to every scenario and see the gaps and the challenges that's bringing everybody, because we're really lacking this.
Yeah, there was a prospective client I had talked to about his father, the founder, very much still involved in his 80s, came into the office every day, definitely needed the paycheck, but also clearly identity and letting go issues. And this prospective client then would have been the second gen. And he was running the business. He had people reporting to him. It wasn't a big office environment, but he said it was so negative. The environment was so negative because everybody kept looking around going, why is he still here? And this potential engagement would have been around, hey, help us convince and understand what are his needs, and convince that, and help him see the implications, what impact this negative cloud is having on the business itself. There was no unlock for growth. It was being stymied. There was just a lot of hesitation. And what I usually say to my clients too is, look, if these conversations aren't being had with you, I usually am kind of talking about the business owner here. If they're not having these direct conversations with you, chances are they're still happening. They're just happening without you. They're happening either by your team, your family, your friends, your customers. Don't think for a minute that your customers aren't asking the question, oh, I wonder what their succession plan is. I wonder when senior is going to hand over the reins to junior. And they're kind of wanting to have this conversation with you, but they're probably not wanting to have that open dialogue. Maybe that relationship isn't there yet, or it's just uncomfortable. So the point is, hey, these things are still swirling. Why not be ahead of it? What do you think holds people back from some of these really tough things?
To me, the big one is the fear of the unknown, because when our minds can handle good, bad, ugly news, whatever it is, as long as we know what's happening or what's going to happen, we can handle that and plan for that. What our brains really struggle with as human beings is the unknown. And so a conversation like that feels like a really big unknown, especially if you've never really had an open and honest conversation with a person before. You don't have any, I'll say, necessarily evidence to know how it's going to go. And so our brains create so much fear and commotion around that this is going to go terrible. And they're, I don't know, going to kick me out of the business, or they're never going to transition it. And it's not going to go well. And so I think fear is the huge one that if I would just encourage people to just like, don't let that fear run away with itself. Really consider, I mean, there's got to have been difficult conversations that you've had with this person before, whether that be a small example or a big example, and using that as a reference point to say, I loved what you said before, Laurie, about like everybody else is talking about this. That is so true. I find that all the time with my clients. They're like, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say this to the CEO, but man, we have a real toxic leadership problem. Like, well, that's the person who needs to know, who needs to be able to solve it. And it becomes a big issue. But these are things that are being talked about already. So are you going to be the kind of person that takes action on it? Or are you going to kind of wait until it has to happen?
Well, that you nailed it. I think fear has 1,000 categories within it. And then there's all these tentacles that come from it. When we were writing No Honesty, Grace and I, to clue you in a little something about the process, we were writing a chapter called The Barriers of Honesty and the Barriers of Openness. And we are just trying to decide. And we started writing it. We actually got a decent ways through it. And we're like, look what we're doing. Like the tone we're creating in the book is, okay, so here are all these fears to focus on. Here are all the barriers that could possibly plague you in your life. And I think what that does, and it incepts people and it gets into them. And so I'm like, I think we got to take this whole chapter out. I don't think we need people focusing on all the barriers that could be slowing them down. And so we spun it a little bit differently. And, I look at Laurie, and one of the reasons I say we're in good hands, and I'm pivoting just a little bit here, but the reason I say we're in good hands is because I know as we've come to know you, I get honesty out of Laurie. That's how I feel. And I feel like you, and especially to do your podcast, you have to be really open. You have to listen without reservation. So I think we're talking to somebody who absolutely gets it. And what I hope happens with this thing is that when you were talking about your prospect, I'm like, yeah, for that prospect even. So even before they're deep in your process, even before they're deeply working with us in EOS and some of the stuff we're doing too, the first time I start out a relationship, I'm encouraging them to be those two things. So if I meet Simon, for instance, who is your prospect, I would say, hey, Simon, I know we're just getting started, but here's a couple of things that are really important to me before we get going. That you are totally honest with me, truly and freely yourself. Just be you. Let your freak flag fly. I don't care. Take it wherever you want to. I know you're just meeting me, but I'm going to be 100% open to anything you say. I promise you. Simon, I'm going to be honest back at you though. And I ask that you be totally open to me. And what happens in that instance is that relationship goes deeper immediately. And now that prospect is right there with you in that relationship. And so now we're all going deeper. And I think the relief for human beings to be able to have a relationship where they can say exactly what they need to or want to is so big. The word freedom is often used in our workshops. But then they can go model that behavior. So that prospect, or, I'm calling him Simon, can go back to the father that's sticking around and saying, hey, let's have a real open and honest conversation here. And then it's like, finally, after all these years, we're finally saying what we need to say. And for a myriad of reasons, people don't do that.
It's hard. I think once we realize that it doesn't have to be hard, it should be that easy. You call it the agreement. I think it's fabulous. And I am going to integrate that. And I think in some ways I kind of have pieces of it, but it's not as formalized and it's not as clear. But yes, thank you for the compliment. I am absolutely honest and authentic with my clients. And I do have that expectation they will be so with me. And I need to make sure that I create that shared understanding up front. So putting it even in the prospecting or, process to get to know one another is a wonderful place to put it. There's a funny story I'll share from my youth. Right out of college, I had my first job, and I had a manager who I really liked, and I considered him an early mentor. However, he introduced every sentence with something like, frankly, honestly. And so finally, I got to the point where I'll just call him Bob. I said, Bob, you know, when you say frankly or honestly, it makes me think that maybe if I don't hear it, you're not being honest or not frank. And he was like, oh. So sometimes these words can have a different connotation when we use them, right? As opposed to when we're not using them. So if we set the stage up front, they're like, look, I'm always going to be honest with you. I don't need to clarify that this sentence is a frankly honest conversation. It's just always going to be a frankly honest conversation. I thought that was a little funny, don't you?
Yeah, hopefully,
Yes.
Grace, you can speak to the data in a moment, but when you're not saying frankly and not saying honestly, I think there's some truth to it. Like, that's the moment in time where you're going to be 100% honest, because our data shows we are not. No one is. Nobody's 100% honest or 100% open 100% of the time. And so, sorry, Grace, I'll let you take it, but he might be right. The times he was speaking otherwise might have been skirting the truth a bit.
Yeah, we're in our assessment that we're measuring people's ability to be open and honest. Right now, we're tracking about a 71% average honesty. So, take the math on the other side of that. At least 29% of the time, we're not being honest. And that's on average. So we can fall anywhere within that. But I have these conversations all the time, Lori. That's why I was kind of chuckling when you were telling it, because I think primarily because of the nature of the work that I do, when I'm having one-to-one conversations with people, I will catch those very quickly. And people, it invariably happens where they lean in and they say, to be honest with you, Grace, or if I'm being honest. And I think people do feel like they need to have that qualifier because, either we're never sure if somebody's being honest with us because we don't have that agreement in place. We don't have that clear communication going back and forth. Or maybe they feel like they kind of have to sugarcoat everything that they say to help it be quote unquote received a little bit better because we're not sure if the person on the other side is open to it. And so it happens all the time to me. So I'm right there with you.
You both had shared a couple of stories from your experiences. Grace, the one that stood out to me, you mentioned you're part of a family business. Spoiler alert, she grew up on a farm with 8 siblings. There's 8 of you, is that right?
There's 8
So
of
I'm
us.
sure
Yeah.
there's always sibling conflict somehow, some way. So that stuck out to me. But Ken, you were also very authentic in some of the things you shared about growing up and getting bullied and, finally reaching the point in your life where you're like, no more, I'm a different person now. And being honest with yourself, both of yourselves on those circumstances. So I thought it'd be a little interesting. I wanted to share something with you. It's just us, right? No one's listening.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. It's
No
just
cutting
us.
this out. Whatever you say, don't cut it.
I won't cut it. No, I went to a Dale Carnegie seminar when I was in, I would say, my 30s. So young, hungry, ambitious. And I was having issues as a leader. I was having issues as I'll call it a supervisor, right? Well, not even a leader, a supervisor. And I couldn't pinpoint why. And I wanted to grow and I was doing amazing work, like all by the numbers. My work product was outstanding, 5 out of 5. Right. But when it came to the leadership part of it and how I wanted to grow, that was the part that was holding me back. And I couldn't look in the mirror enough to know why. And I went to this Dale Carnegie class and there were a couple of exercises that really stood out. And I think they both have to do with creating a kind of a safe space for communications, which is why I'm bringing it up. And so in this exercise, it was platform skills. And we all had to get up in front of the room. We had to say something, and then people would write on an index card how they felt about us or something feedback wise, constructive. And one of the women said, I feel like you look right through me when you're talking to me.
Oh.
And that comment came from a hallway conversation I had with her. And I knew exactly what she meant. And I thought, by golly, she's 100% right. I was doing the classic, okay, who else could I be talking to? My mind is going on to the next conversation, or I'm thinking of the next question already. And man, it hit me like a freight train. And this was, oh gosh, I mean, almost 20 years ago now. So, but that feedback really resonated with me. It really stuck with me. And the other part of it was, well, what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do? Now I've learned this about myself. I've recognized I agree. I'm not going to fight it. I agree with it. It's hard to hear, but okay. What am I going to do? And I decided to go on a bit of a exploration to get feedback. But in order to get the feedback, I had to create a really safe space.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up talking to 2 or 3 people that I worked with closely and trusted. And I did just that. I invited them into, an offsite lunch for a safe space that I really needed to hear. What am I not seeing? And it worked in the sense that they were honest with me. I was able to kind of unpack what some of my own issues were as a leader. And I think it really helped, but I had to be very vulnerable, and I had to create that environment to listen where they could feel safe sharing with me, right? Because it could have just blown up, not like I was a super senior person in this company, but I had, everybody has their own little circles of power, and they didn't want to blow anything up without a relationship, and neither did I.
Right.
But I wanted to share that with you because I think from my perspective, as I was reading your book, that would have been maybe my authentic story that I would have shared in the preface, kind of like you shared. And I don't know, just wanted to share it back with you.
Yeah, I love the growth mindset there, Lori, because that's some of the things that people come to me the most with is feedback. How do I give feedback? How do I communicate feedback? And I do get it, because it can be tough if the person on the other side is not like you and in that position of ready to receive it, and receiving it as gold, really. Ken and I talk about feedback being gold, because that's really what it is. If you can treat it like that and use it as a foundation for growth, it's amazing. Even more so to be able to seek it out. But we're not always there. Sometimes we're positioned to defend ourselves from the feedback instead, because I think we've talked about it culturally, societally, as being a negative thing. Like your manager's coming at you to attack you with this feedback. But it's really not that. If they're doing it from a place of care and respect for you, really out of love for you and your career and your growth, it's a beautiful thing. And just then to take it a step further and to seek it out, that takes some serious inner strength, I think, and being honest with yourself.
Yeah. And it was uncomfortable, right? But then once I did it, I was glad. So that's the encouragement for everybody out there, whether you're a leader or you're an emerging leader, you own a business. I think everybody can take something from that conversation. I want to also ask about this phrase. I'll admit, I don't know a lot about it. I did not see it in your book. Maybe I missed it, but it seems to be popularized from tech companies on the West Coast, if I can put my finger on it. And this little phrase is called radical candor. Can you help me understand what radical candor is and why it might be helpful or not helpful as we talk about open, honest communications?
Yeah. So Radical Candor, that book by Kim Scott, seen her speak. It was an interesting conversation. I think radical candor is important. I think to me, sometimes when I hear people say that, they seem a little bit like, how do I do it though? How do I have that conversation? And I think radical candor, if I were to put it into our words, is honesty. It's one half of the equation. And radical candor is coming from me. Now the question is how, like we're talking about with the feedback, how are you going to receive it? And so we got to have the openness on the other side of that too. And it's really important that we are, as she says, radically candor, have that candor with people, but we got to make sure that they are ready to receive it. Do they understand what that means? Do they know how to be open to things? And so I think that's the part that we got to add to that conversation that we bring to the table. Ken, what else would you add?
Yeah, a big fiery statement coming up. So in the last 15 to 20 years, here are some thematic things, and you really just played right into it for us. Radically candor. Yes, you're hearing that a lot. Authenticity. How many times have you heard people be your authentic self and push for that? The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. Beautiful book, by the way. Your identity. How do you identify? Where are all those items and things? And so here's what's been peddled and pushed on us for the last 15 to 20 years. And we're still riding that wave of all those things that I just mentioned. And it's not a bad thing. Like all four of those things I mentioned are not bad, but separate or siloed, just if that's all we're pushing for 8 billion people in this world, if that's all we push, we are telling people to slowly design a world for themselves. So all those statements to me are really me, myself, and I type statements. How am I authentic? How do I identify my vulnerability, my radical candor? And so, I mean, the pendulum's way over here, and we wonder, why do we have so many issues socially and in our communities? Well, it's because everybody's designing the world for themselves. That's an extremely lonely place to live. And so in No Honesty, what we're trying to get across, and we've even done it, we've put no honesty on the cover, not no openness. Because if it said no openness, nobody would pick it up. And so now they pick it up. And when they read the chapter on openness, and I think if you pick up the book, you don't read the whole thing, please read the chapter on openness, because that's really what our world needs. And if you really want a team to work well together, that's what they have to have. We cannot have a whole bunch of individuals serving me, myself, and I on a leadership team. We have to have them totally open to one another, listening without reservation, and having great communication back and forth. And so, man, that is the missing component in all the stuff that's been going on for the last 2 decades. And so we're just trying to crack that conversation right open.
It should be intuitive of what the benefits are to having open and honest communications in our company, our approach as leaders. But I know you guys have done some research and you found some stats, so I thought we might dive into some of that, particularly around belonging and inviting people in. You found some organizational benefits. For example, you mentioned that there's reduced turnover risk, people leaving, right, if they feel more with a belonging or wanting to be there, less sick days, the employer promoter score, which is something that maybe people would want to learn a little bit about. I don't know if they know what that is. So yeah, just picking up on that, what would you both say are some of the benefits that you've seen, whether from the statistics or your own experience?
Yeah, I think if I could just throw a couple at you. So we know that miscommunication costs a company at least 18% of salaries. At least 18%. Could be more than that, which equals to about $1.2 trillion in the US economy. So you can imagine if we could just shrink that 18% by a bit. And I think so that's just one part of it. But then we know, you mentioned the turnover. I think the number that we shared in the stat was a 56% reduction in turnover rate when we have belonging exist, which is really, people who are being open and honest with each other. And then the last part I think that's really important is a newer stat that I've been sharing, but is that employees who feel heard and respected are 4.6 times more empowered to do their best work. 4.6 times more empowered. Can you imagine if all of your employees were doing 4.6 times more of their best work, what that would unlock for an organization?
That's a huge stat. Yeah, that's a huge stat. All of those things are really impactful. And the miscommunications alone, right? I would think 18% sounds low. It's probably even higher than that. Ken, what's your experience?
I got one stat that keeps me up at night in a good way. It just makes me think. We are seeing a relationship between honesty and openness in people's happiness or life satisfaction, which is awesome. Like the more open and honest you are, the happier comes with it. So I think that's pretty great. But there's one stat that we had, we dissected. So when you take the assessment, it's going to point out where your personal life is at and where your work life is at in terms of open and honest for each of them. And so in the work life stat that we got, I'm throwing a bunch of statistical things at you. So the bottom 25% honesty in work life, they had an average score of honesty. The top 25% had an average score of honesty in their work life. The bottom quartile and the top quartile difference was about 20% on average. So the bottom quartile was 20% less honest. The top quartile was 20% more honest, and they were 20% happier in their lives. So how big, and that was the biggest statistic out of the four. So openness, work life, or honesty, personal life, or openness, work life. Um, so honesty in your work life, how big an impact it is to be able to have a space where you are heard and respected, where you are allowed to be more truly and freely yourself, how much more happiness that creates. And I don't have all the statistics, but I can almost guarantee happiness and retention have a correlation. And so, there's that piece. So how important it is to make sure that your employees feel like they can say what they need to say. What a glorious statistic.
Well, it makes sense. There's this stat, I can't quote the numbers, but people leave supervisors, not companies, right? Something like that, where there tends to be that issue. Maybe it's communications issue. Maybe I don't feel heard. I don't feel like I belong. Any of those things related to who is your direct supervisor can also cause turnover. So I think all of these things fit together in a really important way. One of the other things I want to just pick out from the book was the notion of a fake you, that you're not your total self, that you're a different person in different situations. And you were just alluding to that, Ken, with the data. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'll give you the definition quick, but I think people will know just by hearing it what it seems like, what it feels like, and when it happens. So fake you is the facade we project rather than being 100% honest. And so we're doing this all the time as human beings for a myriad of different reasons. I used to do it when I first started going to networking events because I thought going to a networking event, you had to be this perfect version of a business person, I'll say, quote unquote. And it was, Laurie, it was exhausting. You've probably been to those events where it's just a room full of people pretending to be perfect. And man, is that boring. And I'm sure there's not a lot of actual connections going on because nobody's being real. But this fake you happens all the time, whether it's those networking events, whether it's a team meeting where you can't say what you're really struggling with because your manager's not open to it, or you're in an all hands meeting, or you're working with a client and you have to put on a facade with them. It's exhausting. And it costs employees about 18% of their productivity when that's happening. And so this isn't just we want everybody to feel a certain way at work, but it really is costing on their productivity because what they're going to focus on is projecting that facade first rather than the work that they're doing. And so just considering, man, how much is fake you showing up in your workplace today?
Have you seen fake you?
Everywhere. But I tend to pick on the used car salesman, if I could use that. So it gets picked on. So if you're a used car salesman, this is not intended to offend you, but this is maybe intended to inspire you. I think that why we pick on used car salespeople is because sometimes people are getting sold something that was not necessarily promised. So a salesperson's like, you got to buy this vehicle's awesome. And then you get a junker and that's got all the problems with it. They oversold you. You paid too much, right? That's kind of the story that comes to mind. Well, usually people get or see or experience kind of an icky feeling from salespeople sometimes. So do you know when you feel like, something's off about this one? And you just have this innate thing in you that recognizes something like that. That's totally fake you showing up. So when you're not liking what you're hearing in a way that it feels icky or off, like somebody's presenting something fake to you or it's not lining up, a lot of times it's because people are putting on that facade. So I think of also, if I could equate it to, so I'm a little bit of a reality TV show junkie. Please don't judge me. But I love just watching human beings and how they act. And you know who I love? Like I love the freaks. I love the people who lay it all out there and they're totally themselves because I'm like you. You're a real human being. You're not being fake. You're going to put yourself out there as proud and messed up as you are. And that's a real human being. Everybody else who likes to fake it or present is perfect, even though every human being knows dang well you are not. I mean, I don't want a piece of that. I want real human beings. And so, fake you is kind of born out of like I mean, listen to how it sounds. Like fake you also maybe sounds like something else.
It
And it's
does.
trying to
I
sound,
was thinking about that.
yeah,
Sounds like the FU in case you
it's,
didn't connect the dots.
yes, it's close, but it's meant to emotionally charge you. Like, get that away,
Yeah,
get rid of it.
get rid of it.
Last thing you hear, fake it till you make it. Or in interviews, just act like you got the job already. I think this causes a lot of problems for people. And so I think when you feel fake you rising, you got to figure out a way to pull that mask off and be your authentic self. And then the people that you belong with or who will genuinely care about you will see you for who you are, and it'll be a better match for you in your life. And so fake you is a pretty big portion of the book to help you realize, like, man, you are projecting something else that is not you. And that is going to drain you somehow, some way.
Well, it goes without saying that I think everybody should buy this book and read it. And again, it's called No Honesty by Ken Bogard and Grace Gavin. And you guys have been so generous with your time today to talk with me about it. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to share with me?
Yeah, I think if I could just quickly talk about the wall, because we just talked about fake you, which is what blocks us from being honest. But I think what's equally as important, and really I think we struggle with more, is the wall. So the wall is the divide we put between ourselves and others rather than being 100% open. So if you're listening to this, I want you to just quite literally imagine a brick wall going up. And that is what happens when we are no longer listening to somebody because we're pre-populating our responses, because we don't like what they said, because we disagree with them, because their last idea was terrible, so why would I listen to this idea? And we put up the wall to people all the time. But what I don't think we realize is that if we put up a wall on this side, we put up a wall on the other side, and then in front of us and behind us, well, eventually we end up just being surrounded by all of these brick walls instead of by the people in our lives, because that's what we've chosen to do instead of really listening to people. And so then it's no wonder that in the US right now, we're having a serious problem with isolation and loneliness to the point of it leading to premature death for individuals. And so I would really encourage listeners to watch out for fake you. Yes, it's exhausting and draining. And also watch out for the wall. Where are you actively disconnecting from the people in your lives? Because what we need to survive as human beings is that connection. And so I would encourage people to watch for both of those.
Yeah. How is a wall built? This is sort of a joke, not a joke. How is a wall built?
Huh.
One brick at a time. So if we have these situations where we feel like someone put a brick there, quote unquote, right? Really, we've put the brick there and we're doing it again and again and again. And so to your point, maybe we've created this kind of negative castle around ourselves. We're stuck in this tower by just sheer volume of bricks that have gone up. So how do we either break the brick or stop it from being built? Those of us who are fans of the wall, right? And sort of can have that negative connotation from Pink Floyd. And we can think about the power of the wall coming down. Those of us who are Gen Xers and remember 1991 and the power of the wall coming down in Berlin. So the wall is a very powerful metaphor. I'm glad you shared that, Grace. Yeah. Ken, how about for you? Anything kind of last thoughts before we wrap up the show?
Sure. I just love that Grace used the wall to end it, because I think people hang on to honesty too much, and I think we got to lean into openness. I think this world was designed for 8 billion people, and we got to stop treating it like it was designed for one. And when people really start figuring out how to do that by listening without reservation, putting your own needs and wants on pause for all the life forms that exist here, you're going to be such a happier person in life. And so I would just encourage everybody to really lean into being open and just watch how it eliminates all that need for control. And you can actually enjoy the 8 billion people in this world instead of trying to fight them all.
Beautiful. Love it. Grace, Ken, we've covered a lot of ground today. If people want to follow up with you, what's a good way to get in touch?
Yeah, you can find both of us on LinkedIn. We share content about this all the time. We love talking about it. And then the other way is to go to our website, which is nohonesty.com. Again, that's KNOW. On there, you'll find links to the book, the assessment that we talked about, and all other kinds of goodies that we're putting out into the world all the time.
Awesome. Awesome. Ken, Grace, thank you both for coming on Succession Stories and sharing your expertise with me today.
Thanks so much for having us.
You're awesome.
And to our audience, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following, subscribing the show. We really appreciate you doing that. And if you want to see the videos, not only from Succession Stories, but our sister show, The Entrepreneur Gene, we encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, The Business Transition Sherpa. Stay tuned for more Succession Stories. Come into your inbox, join our newsletter. We look forward to interacting with you in our community. Join us next time on Succession Stories. We'll see you soon.